first thing I noticed was that my curtains were tied back wrong. That sounds small, and maybe it is, if you have never had the experience of learning your own room by repetition. But when a space belongs to you, your body memorizes it in quiet ways. The angle of a chair after you step around it every morning, the order of books on the nightstand, the way the window catches heat in the afternoon, the knot you use when you pull the curtains open because your hands learned it years ago and never needed to think about it again. Mine were tied in a tight double loop. I never used a double loop. I used one wrap and a tuck because I hated fighting fabric at night when I was tired. I stood in the doorway with my overnight bag still in my hand and looked around the room I had locked before leaving for 3 days. The bed was made, but not by me. The drawer below my mirror was closed all the way, which told me someone had pushed it in instead of leaving it at the shallow inch I always left it. And the pale blue sweater I kept folded across the foot of the bed had been placed on the chair near the closet. Not thrown there. Placed. As though someone had wanted the room to appear neat after finishing whatever they believed they had a right to do in it. I did not feel fear first. I felt the sick, familiar drag of recognition. Some families do not know how to let adulthood arrive. They treat it like a temporary mood, a phase of unnecessary distance. A stubborn performance children adopt after learning words like boundary and privacy and independence from books or therapists or people outside the family who, in their opinion, make everything colder than it needs to be. My father had never adjusted well to the fact that I became a person he could no longer narrate. When I was 13, he called it concern. When I was 16, he called it protection. When I was 20, he called it his house, his rules. And by 27, after I had moved back to help him keep a home he never could have managed alone, he had upgraded the language one more time. Now he called it family. As if family were a master key. I put my bag down and walked straight to my bedside table. The top drawer slid open with more resistance than usual. Inside, my journal was upside down. Not open, not visibly damaged, just upside down, spine to the right instead of the left. That was enough. I knew then that I was not standing in a room where things had merely shifted. I was standing in a room that had been handled. I wish I could tell you I marched downstairs immediately and demanded an explanation with the clean certainty women in films are given when the plot wants them to be heroic. But real violation is often less cinematic than that. Real violation makes you still. It makes you start collecting details, as if certainty requires evidence even after your body already knows. It makes you rehearse reasonable sentences, because somewhere deep in you, you already understand that the person who crossed the line is going to ask you to prove there was one. My father was in the kitchen, peeling an orange when I came downstairs. He looked up, smiled, and said, "There she is," with such normal warmth that for one irrational second I wondered whether I had imagined everything. Then he looked at me properly, really looked, and I saw the tiny change in his face. Not guilt. Something more insulting than guilt. Preparedness. He knew I knew, and he had already decided what story he was going to tell about it. "How was the trip?" he asked. "Fine," I said. Then, because I was suddenly too tired to perform my way toward the truth, I asked, "Did you go into my room?" People like to say liars hesitate. In my experience, habitual boundary breakers do the opposite. They answer too quickly because they are not choosing between honesty and dishonesty. They are choosing which version of authority to wear. "I had to," he said. Not, "Yes," not, "I'm sorry." Not even, "I needed something." I had to. A complete moral argument compressed into 3 words. "For what?" I asked. He shrugged, still peeling the orange. "Your window was open before that storm came through. I didn't want rain getting in." There had been no storm. And even if there had been, he did not need to explain the curtains, the drawer, the chair, the journal. The problem with using one lie to excuse a violation is that the room keeps testifying against you. I said, "My room was locked." That was when he finally put the orange down. Slowly, deliberately, as if I had changed the tone of the conversation by mentioning the one detail he wanted kept abstract. "You lock your door against me now?" he asked. "Against me." There it was. The hidden premise. In his mind, the lock was not a boundary around my space. It was an accusation against his character. And people who think access equals love always experience boundaries as insults. I told him the lock was there because I wanted privacy. He gave a short laugh that barely qualified as a laugh at all. The kind that says we are both adults here, but only one of us is being silly. Privacy from your own father? He asked. This is how some violations try to win. They do not defend the act directly. They downgrade your need until the act seems almost reasonable by comparison. I said yes. I'm an adult. That should have been the end of it. For anyone else, maybe it would have been. But some parents do not hear I'm an adult as a fact. They hear it as ingratitude. He folded his arms and leaned back against the counter. If you're old enough to lock doors in this house, then you're old enough to stop leaving certain things where they can be found. Even now, I can still feel the room go quiet around me when he said that. Because until then, there had still been a part of me clinging to the possibility that he had snooped in the abstract. That he had poked around without truly seeing anything intimate enough to turn this into humiliation as well as trespass. But there it was. He had found something. And instead of being ashamed that he found it by breaking into a locked room, he had come prepared to shame me for owning it. I did not ask what he meant. I would not give him the dignity of making me say it aloud. He did it anyway. Not in graphic terms. Worse. In the language of disappointed ownership. He said he had not raised me for that kind of thing. He said some parts of modern life made people selfish and unnatural and secretive. He said if I wanted to live however I pleased, I should at least have the decency not to bring it under his roof. Under his roof. The house was half mine on paper and more than half mine in practice. I had sold a perfectly good apartment and moved back, because after my mother died, he could not keep up. Not with the mortgage, not with repairs, not with taxes, not with being alone in a place whose silences had become too loud for him. We bought the new house together because it was the only arrangement he could afford with dignity intact, and I paid the larger share because my income was steadier, and, if I am honest, because old habits die slowly in daughters, who were raised to believe being useful is the purest form of love. Every month the mortgage left my account. Every month he transferred utilities and groceries and spoke as if our arrangement were a mutual kindness. Maybe it had been, at first. Maybe that is what makes betrayal so disorienting. It often begins inside a genuine act of care. I had not moved back to become a teenager again. I had moved back because two adults were trying to make one practical life work. Only one of us meant practical. The other meant restored access. I wish I had said all of that in the kitchen. I wish I had looked him in the face and told him the object he found was not the scandal here, that the scandal was a man in his 60s using a hidden spare key to enter his grown daughter's locked room, and then standing beside a bowl of oranges trying to make her feel dirty for having a private life. Instead, I said the smaller, truer sentence. I said, "You had no right." He stared at me the way older relatives sometimes do when they feel a younger woman has violated some invisible rule of gratitude by naming reality too directly. Then he said, "I'm your father." Some people hear that as explanation. I heard it as confession. Because that was the whole problem. He believed fatherhood was not a relationship but a permanent credential. A title that outranked my consent. A role that exempted him from the ordinary rules of another person's space. I left the kitchen before I started crying. Not because I was ashamed. Because tears are often treated as weakness by people who already think your boundaries are theatrical. I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and sat on the floor with my back against it, like a woman defending something that had already been entered. That is the part no one really prepares you for. Once a room has been violated, the room changes. Nothing dramatic has to happen. No broken frame, no smashed drawer, no obvious theft. Just the knowledge that another person has stood among your private things and felt entitled to interpret them. That alone can make a familiar place feel briefly uninhabitable. I looked around and started seeing everything through his eyes. The robe on the hook, the stack of books beside the bed, the journal in the drawer, the sealed box at the back of the closet I had once considered too boring to hide carefully because, after all, I lived with my father, not a burglar. That afternoon I did something I had not done since college. I called my friend Lena and told the whole story from beginning to end. Not the polite version. Not the edited daughter version, where I tried to make him sound old-fashioned instead of invasive. The real version. The one where he had used a spare key to bypass a lock I installed, precisely because this was not a new problem. When I finished, there was a silence on the line. Then she asked the question that split the whole thing open. Do you really think this is the first time he's gone through your room? I said no before I consciously chose the word. Because I knew. Of course I knew. The lock had not appeared out of nowhere. It had come after years of small disappearances and subtle evidence. A drawer nudged shut, a page marker moved, a folder no longer sitting exactly where I left it, the distinct feeling that my interior life was never fully unwatched, even when the house was quiet. Lena said, then it's not about what he found. It's about whether you're willing to keep funding a life where he thinks access to you is included in the bills. That sentence made me physically cold. Not because she was wrong, because she was right so efficiently. The bills, the mortgage, the groceries, the little repairs I scheduled because he found phone calls tedious. The water heater I replaced on short notice last winter. The property taxes I handled because numbers made him anxious. I had built a whole adult arrangement around the idea that helping him would make him safer, calmer, softer. But all I had really done was create a structure in which he could depend on me materially while refusing to respect me psychologically. That night at dinner, he acted almost cheerful. As if saying his piece earlier had reset the hierarchy to his satisfaction. He asked whether I wanted salmon or chicken tomorrow. He complained about the neighbor's hedge. He told a story about someone from his old job who had developed a drinking problem after retirement. He wanted ordinary life back immediately. That is another thing boundary breakers often want. Instant normalization after injury. If they can get you discussing vegetables and errands by sunset, they can tell themselves the earlier violation has already been folded into the natural history of the relationship. I answered in short sentences and went to bed early. I did not sleep. I made lists in my head. Things I owned, things I paid for, documents I needed copies of, what the house might sell for, whether I had enough savings to walk away fast if I had to, whether a woman is cruel if she finally protects the life she keeps being asked to make smaller for somebody else's comfort. By morning, I understood something I should have understood years ago. Shame is a very efficient smokescreen. He wanted me embarrassed about the object because embarrassment would keep me from staring directly at the mechanism. If we spent the week circling the fact that he found something intimate, then maybe we would never sit with the simpler, uglier truth. He had entered a locked room because he believed my right to privacy stopped where his curiosity began. So I stopped talking about what he found. From that point on, every time he tried to steer the conversation toward those kinds of things, I brought it back to the door. The lock, the spare key, the journals, the room. He hated that. Because the door made him the actor instead of the victim of changing times. The door kept the facts stubborn. On the second day, he tried a new tactic. He said I was making too much of it. Because, quote, families don't keep secrets from each other. I told him privacy and secrecy are not the same thing. He said that sounded like therapist talk. I said maybe therapists exist because some people need simple truths translated into language they cannot dismiss. He looked genuinely offended, as if I had escalated the conflict by refusing to be managed back into confusion. Then he said the sentence that finally emptied the room of any lingering doubt. He said, if you want total privacy, maybe you shouldn't be living with other people. There are sentences that sound practical until you turn them over once. Then their cruelty shows. Because he was right in only the narrowest, most manipulative sense. Yes, shared living requires flexibility. No, it does not require surrendering your locked bedroom to inspection by a parent who thinks fatherhood places him above consent. He was trying to redefine an extreme intrusion as ordinary cohabitation. And if I accepted that framing, I would lose long before we reached any decision about the house. So I said the thing I had been avoiding. I said maybe we should sell. He laughed at first. a dismissive little breath through his nose. Then he saw my face. His own changed instantly. "Over this?" he asked. No one says over this with more outrage than a person who has spent years minimizing a pattern that finally found its proof object. I told him it was not over this one incident. It was over the fact that I no longer trusted him in a home I was paying for. It was over the lock. It was over the years of acting like access to me was natural, and my attempts to slow that access were personal betrayals. It was over the knowledge that next time would not feel like a surprise, only a continuation. He said I was being heartless. He said after everything he had done for me, threatening to uproot his life over a misunderstanding was cruel. He said he had sacrificed enough as a father without being made to feel like a criminal inside his own family. Inside his own family. Again that phrase. Again the same logic. The one that had followed me since childhood. If he could place himself under the broad, holy umbrella of family, then my individual rights were supposed to dissolve beneath it. But by then, something in me had gone very calm. Not numb, resolved. It was the calm that comes when your confusion finally runs out of road. I told him the misunderstanding was thinking my life inside that room was still subject to his review. I told him I had already spent too many years trying to explain basic dignity in softer language than it deserved. And I told him I was going to speak to an agent about our options unless he agreed to one thing immediately. No entering my room for any reason, no use of the spare key, and no further discussions about what he found. He said I was threatening him. That almost made me laugh. Because there is something darkly absurd about being accused of aggression by a man who opened a locked door and then tried to shame you with the evidence of your own adulthood. For the next week, the house felt like a place pretending to be a home. We moved around each other politely. Too politely. He stopped mentioning my room but began performing injured silence with such dedication that even the walls seemed recruited into it. He washed his own plate with pointed care. He answered questions in one sentence. He let the television play louder than usual. He became the wounded party in every room he entered. And still, I noticed, he never once said he was sorry. Not for entering. Not for snooping. Not for using my private belongings as ammunition. Nothing. Because apologies require you to admit the line was real before you crossed it. He was still trying to negotiate the line itself out of existence. Lena came over on Saturday under the pretense of helping me sort paperwork. When my father left to run errands, she stood in my bedroom doorway and looked around quietly. Then she said, "This room looks like somebody keeps having to defend it." I almost cried at that, which surprised me. Not because she was wrong. Because she had noticed, without my explaining. The little extra lockbox now tucked into the closet. The files moved into sealed envelopes. The way I had started keeping my journal in my bag instead of the drawer. The posture of a person who had not changed addresses, but had started living as if she might need to evacuate emotionally at any time. That afternoon we pulled mortgage documents, payment records, insurance papers, and the purchase agreement. Every signature felt clarifying. Every bank statement reminded me that I was not trapped in the moral fantasy he preferred. The one where I was still a dependent child asking for too much. I was an equal owner. More than that, I was the reason the arrangement functioned at all. I do not think he believed I would actually move toward selling until I booked the consultation. Even then, he called it dramatic. He said I was ruining a stable situation over pride. But pride had nothing to do with it. Pride wants to win. I wanted peace. There is a difference. The hardest part, if I am honest, was not him. It was the chorus that arrived once other relatives sensed a fracture. An aunt who told me men of his generation don't understand all this privacy stuff. A cousin who said I should avoid throwing away a house over embarrassment. An older family friend who asked, in the voice people use when pretending neutrality, whether there might be room for compassion because parents worry. Parents worry. What a useful phrase. How many indignities have been smuggled through history under that banner? Searches, questions, intrusions, monitoring. Violations repackaged as devotion. I stopped trying to defend myself in the abstract. I used one sentence. I said, He used a key to enter my locked room and then shamed me for what he found there. Most people went quiet after that. Because stripped of sentiment, the story becomes hard to romanticize. In the end, what changed me was not the argument itself. It was the realization that I had spent years trying to graduate in his mind, and he had no interest in attending the ceremony. Some parents accept the finished adult standing in front of them. Others keep reaching backward for the child they could search, correct, define, and own more easily. And if you love them, really love them, you can waste a terrible amount of time trying to earn a respect they think family already replaced. I still do not know whether people like him ever understand the moment things truly break. He probably thinks the issue was the object, or my tone, or the lock, or the modern world. Anything but the simplest truth. He opened a door that was closed for a reason. Then he asked me to feel ashamed for having a life on the other side of it. That was the day I understood something no one had managed to explain to me cleanly before. Privacy is not the reward for living alone. It is the minimum dignity you are owed anywhere love is real. And once someone teaches you that they experience your boundaries as disrespect, you have to stop negotiating the vocabulary and start deciding whether the house itself is still worth keeping.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.